Thanks for listening to Entreneato, the show where we help you live the Neato life. By listening to Entreneato, you'll learn how to develop multiple streams of income. You'll hear amazing stories and takeaways from professionals in their field. And you'll learn more about yourself and how you're wired. The average person spends 90,000 hours at work in their lifetime. Student loan debt is at an all-time high, and 41% of all divorce is based on finances. If you feel like you're surviving, but you wouldn't exactly say you're thriving, then you've come to the right place. Whatever stage of life you're in, Entreneato is here to help you be a better entrepreneur. Break out of that rat race and start living your Neato life today. And now introducing your Neato host, Matt Neff.
Welcome back to Entreneato. Happy 2020, Entreneato family. We have a great episode for you today on the topic of combating fear. You know, everything you want is just outside your comfort zone. But if you're crippled by the same old fears of 2019 and your past, you'll never achieve the greatness you were born for. On today's show, keynote speaker, success coach, and best-selling author Mitch Matthews and I talk about the science behind combating fear and using mind hacks to reach your true potential. You'll learn more about how your brain is wired and how to utilize a few simple mindsets to make 2020 your best year yet. Here's a little bit more on today's guest. Mitch speaks to student, corporate, nonprofit, and association audiences around the world on the power of dream, think, do. His work has been seen on ABC, NBC, CBS, the Huffington Post, TEDx, and more. He's become a well-respected thought leader on coaching and workplace mentoring. Plus, he has created a coach training program that has been utilized around the globe. You can listen to Mitch on his popular weekly podcast, Dream, Think, Do, where he inspires people around the world to dream bigger, think better, and do more. Mitch proudly lives a highly caffeinated lifestyle in Des Moines, Iowa, with his wife and their 2 sons. I also want to mention a great book by John Maxwell, which is totally redundant. A great book, John Maxwell, called How Successful People Think. Change your thinking, change your life. You can purchase a copy by clicking the link in the show notes, or get it for free as part of our 30-day trial through Audible by heading to our website and clicking the free book tab at the top of the screen. Make sure you check that out. And if you'd like to help the show even more, we'd love for you to consider supporting us through Patreon at patreon.com/Entreneato. That's patreon.com/Entreneato, or by leaving us a written 5-star review on iTunes. Guys, thanks again for listening today. I hope you had a great 2019. So excited for 2020, all that's going to unlock and the next levels you're going to go to in your life and business. Without further ado, we give you Mitch Matthews and the science behind combating fear. Well, welcome back to Entreneato. My guest today is best-selling author Mitch Matthews. Mitch, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Matt. It's an honor to get to be here, buddy.
Happy New Year to you as well.
Yeah, how about that? Happy 2020.
2020. Today's the day. I was super pumped. We have a couple episodes in the hopper, and we were able to move some things around. And I'm like, okay, who do I want to speak? This is a big Wednesday. You know, Wednesday, January 1st, 2020. It's exciting. I'm excited to have you on. I'm like, perfect. This is what we're going to talk about today is goals that stick. So I'm super pumped to learn more about that today. But before we jump into it, if you would please share a way anywhere we can drive our audience to.
Absolutely. They can check out MitchMatthews.com. We spent our entire marketing budget coming up with that domain name. What should we call it?
I love it. Well done.
So yeah, absolutely.
$2 million invested.
Exactly right. The whole, it's just all there. But that's probably the best way for people to kind of find out what we're up to. But I also have a podcast called Dream, Think, Do. People can just go to dreamthinkdo.com. That'll route you right to the podcast on Apple Podcasts. And we get to talk with movers and shakers and people who are dreaming bigger, thinking better, and doing more of what they're put on the planet to do. And that's what we want for people.
So cool. And just for our listeners, I just want to drop some hints here. On the website on MitchMatthews.com, that's Matthews with 2 T's, FYI. It says #1 for inspiration, the Huffington Post, that little struggling company called the Huffington Post. Maybe you've never heard of them. Also, top 5% of all podcasts and top career podcast in 2018. So these are big things, guys. So make sure you check it out. Check out Mitch's information. He's got a lot of great services and products out there. And then make sure you subscribe. You know, you guys know this isn't your first podcast you've ever listened to. If it is, right. This is a podcast that's essentially like a radio show for my friends that don't know what podcasts are. So
I love it. I love it.
So yeah, thanks Mitch so much for sharing that. We'll make sure we put all those in the show notes as well. But I would love to hear more about your backstory. We spoke briefly on the phone about a month ago, which was a great time. I really felt like we hit it off, and I would love for you to share away anything you think would be best for our listeners to hear.
Absolutely. How far back do you want me to go? I mean, as a little boy.
2 weeks old usually is the sweet spot. You know,
well,
what do you remember? You know, 2 weeks old.
I won't go too far back, but I do think that it actually helps that I grew up in a small town in Iowa, and I grew up a scared kid. As I got older, I didn't necessarily get better at dealing with the fear. I just got better at hiding it. And it kind of ate me up on the inside. But I did learn over time the importance of feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And so that led me on a number of different adventures. So as I started to get older in high school, I had this crazy idea that I loved history. I loved, diving into kind of how our country was formed and shaped and all of those things. And all of a sudden I got this harebrained idea. I thought, gosh, how do the British teach about the American Revolution? And so I got this idea of going and taking an American history class in England. So at 18, I got on a plane. My parents were supportive of my crazy ideas. And so I got on a plane and went and lived in England for a year and took American history in England, which was a fascinating adventure and basically getting to see something I was very familiar with from a completely different perspective. You know, it was very interesting that I wound up taking, this American history class from an anti-American socialist. And
see, right there. I have like 100 questions on that. Like their take on
it's
us.
Fascinating. And it was one of those things where I realized like, this is a situation. One of the first situations I'd ever found myself in, especially at 18, being from a small town in Iowa, where I realized I was in a debate. We saw each other as both being wrong, and at the same time, we were both completely right. Yeah. You know? And so it's those kinds of things. So I've always kind of, from that standpoint, I, grew up kind of a worried, scared kid, but feel wildly blessed to say kind of, through God's grace and a lot of prayer and kind of just stepping out and some things, had some kind of crazy fun experiences. One of which though was, I got into the pharmaceutical industry after college. Initially it was a great fit, but after about a decade, I'd grown and the industry had changed and it became a job that was killing me. So on the side, I started to create a coaching and speaking business and grew that. I thought it was going to take about 5 years to be able to grow it to the point where I could replace my income, because we were living a sitcom life at the time, which was single income, 2 children, and oppressive mortgage.
I was like, please, thank you. Because I'm like, where are you going with this?
So I couldn't just quit. I would have loved to quit because the job really had become a very bad fit. It was a good job, but it had become a very bad fit. But over the course of time, I learned a lot, made a ton of mistakes, started to build a plan. That's what we talk about in Dream, Think, Do. You dream first, you think second. That's the building the plan. And then you take massive action. Started to do that. Thought it was going to take about 5 years, and it wound up taking less than 2 to actually build it to the point where I could replace my income. And so I've been doing that since 2002. I've been a coach and a speaker and now an author and a podcaster for a number of years. And again, made a ton of mistakes, but learned quite a bit. And, now I'm getting to help other people do the same thing. So I feel wildly blessed and very grateful for what we get to do.
That is so cool. We're just getting started. I have like 4 questions for you. So if I could go off tangent a little bit. So,
oh yeah, I love tangents.
I'm obsessed with how do you battle nervousness? How do you battle fear? Things like that. Like in real time, like say you're getting up to speak in a room full of people, and it could be 5 people, it could be 5,000, but it could be scary. So I travel and do music and stuff on the side as one of my income streams with a friend of mine. That's awesome. There's times where it's like, I have to be like mentally ready to go. And I would just love to hear more about what are your thoughts on that, as far as like, what's some of the self-talk that you've done? And then, so that'd be part 1 question. And then part 2 would be, if you don't mind me asking, where did the fear come from with you as a little kid? Because for example, for me, I grew up in a great home, like middle class, hardworking people. My dad worked for GM. My mom stayed at home and then also helped with special needs ministries in the school and sign language, things like that. but my mom has epilepsy. And so
Wow.
I grew up, it's like I was born in 1980. So it's 86, 87. And, we don't have cell phones, things like that. And my mom has a seizure and I'm home alone. And I'm not sure what to do. So that happened probably, I don't know, 15, 20 times over my childhood. And I just remember feeling, and I remember feeling like, you're my mom and dad. And like, you guys are supposed to be, when you're a kid, your parents are invincible and it's Superman, Superwoman. But to see at such a young age, someone who's supposed to be a rock to you, in which she was in so many other ways, but had this challenge, that fear really got into me, like into my bone marrow. So I was like, the worst could happen because it has happened. And, so that I say all that to say, to kind of preface the two questions would be, what do you say to fear when it's time to step out? And, if maybe you're doing something like, man, I'm a little nervous here. And then also where did the fear come from for you and how did you combat it?
Yeah, no. Those are great questions. And wow, I mean, what a series of life events where, you are taking care of your caretaker, right? Like, so that's a very real thing. So let's break those questions down separately, even though they're related. So, you asked, how do you handle fear in real time? And that is a big deal because my initial strategies were horrible when it came to worry. One of the things that, my early on solutions were, not necessarily, as I said, getting better at handling it. I got better at hiding it. And that is a horrible thing, right? And then one of the things that I did was I would tell myself, I'll really enjoy this, or I'll really be in the moment, or I'll really allow myself to experience life at its fullest once I get this done, or once I can check this off my to-do list, or once this event is over. That's when I'll really put worry behind me. But for now, I'm just going to stay afraid. And, what would happen is you check the thing off the list, you'd get the event over, and boom, something else would happen and you're right back into the fear. And so one of the things is I realized, partly it is just kind of taking the step and realizing, okay, I'm going to do it. And, I'm going to experiment and all of those things. And I had to really learn to kind of not put off joy, but to actually experience joy in the moment, as independent from the circumstance as possible. That's key. But we can talk more about that if you want to. But let's talk about nuts and bolts of fear. So I'll give you an example. I actually spoke last night, and to your point, like sometimes the audience is 5, sometimes it's 5,000. But last night, interestingly enough, I had a talk. We have a ministry at our church. We're really involved with our church. And we have a ministry for young adults, young professionals. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting about that is I love this group. But in some ways, I feel fear rise up when I go and get to speak to this group more than a lot of like the corporate audiences that I have. And I think part of it is like, here I am in front of this group of young professionals who look cool, and who dress cool, and who probably are cool. And I feel everything but, right? Like I'm probably one of the oldest people in the room. I turned 50 this year, and I got gray hair. I'm the only gray hair in the audience, right? Or in the room. And I have this overwhelming feeling of I'm not cool enough to be here.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's one of the very real fears that tries to creep in just in that specific audience. Now, also, I'll just throw it in for reality in that, here I'm actually speaking on the subject of abundance and going after dreams. And what does God say about how we're supposed to live, right? And I really believe in that. That's what I live to. But on the day where I'm supposed to speak, we have a pipe break in our basement, and let's just say dirty water is spewed all over our basement, right? So I'm going to be speaking on abundance and pursuing your dreams on a day where my basement now does not smell abundant, right? And the plumber's like, I don't know, it's going to be anywhere from $2,000 to $10,000, all this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And I have to step up. And one of my big fears is, am I going to authentically be able to deliver the message, even though I feel so far from what my message is, right? Like, or kind of what most people would probably assume I'm going to say. right? Like, hey, if it's abundant life, then you're always happy and
nothing
everything's
bad happens.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I think in some ways, then one of the fears is, am I going to be inauthentic? Right. Like, because I can amp up, right? I can bring energy, but at the same time, I've kind of gotten to a point where I'm like, I do not want to speak on a subject where I can't speak and be authentic and transparent and real, and those kinds of things. So, and then there's also the lizard part of your brain that's also just saying, you're going to trip on the way up the stairs and look like a jackweed in front of this group of people and all those kinds of things. And so, those, just to kind of be real with everybody, like those were some of the very real temptations towards fear. So I think part of it is just to realize those are in fact temptations to be afraid. I wasn't necessarily afraid, but I was feeling tempted to be afraid. And I think sometimes just recognizing that is one thing to go, yeah, that's a very real fear. Yes, that is something to, that I could be thinking about, something I'm dealing with, all those things. I had an author on. She's actually a good friend. She's from New Zealand. So everything she says just sounds smarter.
Oh, yeah.
Because she's from down under.
Sure.
Right. But one of the things she talks about is that, she kind of speaks to the amygdala, the lizard brain that a lot of people talk about. But she talks about that. And I actually call that your inner bodyguard, right? It is fine-tuned to look for danger and try to keep you from it, right?
Inner bodyguard. That is amazing.
Yeah, right.
That
like it's your
so
inner
good.
bodyguard. So
yeah.
And it used to be that inner bodyguard was trying to keep you from saber-toothed tigers and that other tribe that was out there to murder you, all those kinds of things, right? But last night, my inner bodyguard was trying to keep me off that stage because that represented danger. Now, one of the other things I had to realize is that one, yes, it feels dangerous because there's risk, but there's not actual danger. Like the chances of somebody, a saber-toothed tiger jumping up on stage and devouring me in front of the room is pretty low. I mean, I suppose there's still like a minute chance of something like that, but it's pretty low. And so I can, and what I love about Lise and her strategy is she actually names that voice.
Oh,
because it's one of those things. You'll hear some people's strategy, which is, malarkey. It's a waste of air, because some people will just dismiss it and go, don't worry about it. Right. Which is like telling don't worry about it, which you can't force yourself to forget something. It's useless advice. Right. But one of the things she does, and of course in this, New Zealand accent, she's named that voice Nigel.
Of course.
Right. Like, how great is that?
It's
and she's like, she knows.
New Zealand name ever.
Right.
Yeah,
right. I'm like, oh, I said, did you know a Nigel? She's like, I knew a Nigel in high school, but he's not named after that Nigel. Great. Right. But she says, you need to acknowledge those fears. You need to acknowledge your inner bodyguard because it's doing its job, trying to keep you safe. But to try to just dismiss it, it's just going to come back in other ways. So she'll acknowledge, she's like, thank you, Nigel, for alerting me to those dangers, but I'm safe.
Wow.
And it's okay.
That's amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. And what's amazing is she says she can almost feel immediate calm as she does that. So I have a version of that going, yes, I realize I am concerned that, one of my concerns is literally, am I dressed cool enough for this audience? Right. Which the answer is probably no.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So I usually have some fun with them when I get up there.
Yeah.
And just out myself kind on some of those
address
concerns.
It right there.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
So
because
funny.
it's one of those things where, and it's almost immediately endearing because it's also honest. Like if I wasn't able to do it from an authentic place, I wouldn't ever do it. But what's funny is here I'm looking at a sea of people who look cooler than me, who are obviously younger than me, all of those things. And what's funny is they're looking back at me and they, for the most part, other than the one jackweed, right? For the most part, they're sitting there and they feel old. They don't feel cool. And they're also thinking the same thing about everybody in the room, like everybody in the room's cooler than me. So if I get up there and I am able to express some of that or be able to say, listen, you guys are way cooler than I am, But if you're still willing to learn from me, I think we can have some fun.
That's so great.
And it's great because I've also, Matt, you've probably had these kinds of experiences with as much time as you spent in front of audiences. But I can say to my inner Nigel, listen, I have fallen on the way up to the stage, right? I was at Kent State University. I stepped up during a big dramatic part of my talk in front of 400 students and academic, and faculty and all of that. I stepped up and ripped out my jeans, like a 12-inch rip in the crotch of my jeans. Like the worst, like the thing that most people like think I will die. I will absolutely die if something like that happens. All right. I literally had to happen. And Matt, it was one of the best things that's ever happened in front of a live audience. I'm glad I had the boxer briefs on. I will say that right from the start.
Because you would have went to jail, but yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. But I did it. It ripped. It was a big rip. And the people in the front rows, two front rows, and that's probably like 50 people because it was a good sized room with a lot of people in it. Their eyes got huge, but nobody else could hear it, right? And so now I've got to commit. Like, do I just do the rest of this talk like a penguin? Right. And just waddle around the room? Do I address why everybody in the front row has saucer-sized eyes? And I wound up just going with it. I'm like, gang, you are not going to believe this, but I just ripped out my pants. So I take off my jacket, I put it around, and I basically, have it forward facing. So it looks now like a Scottish kilt.
Yeah.
Basically.
It's brilliant.
And I am like, literally, I'm dying. The audience is dying. And I'm like, I told them, I'm like, this is my worst nightmare. And here we all are having just one of the best laughs ever. I said, I think I'm going to try to rip my pants out on every talk in the future.
Right.
This is
it's
awesome.
Your thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's my jam now. This is what I do. And so it's just those things of being able to say it to my inner Nigel. Those are good things to be concerned with. Thank you for alerting me. But some of those things that have happened in the past and they actually worked still. So I think we're going to be okay. So it's a little bit of just acknowledging those things, saying, thanks, Nigel. I got this.
Yeah, at ease. And people that were at that talk where you blew out your pants was like, they will never forget that. They'll be like, they will never
forget that.
So
literally,
that's kind of part of it.
Somebody linked to me on Instagram the other day, and they were following up on a dream, but it was from that audience. And they're like, I'll never forget that talk ever.
Wow. That is amazing. So what did you end up going with when the pipe burst and you were in front of all those young adults? Did you mention that? Like, hey guys,
I did. I totally did. And I said, here's the thing. And this kind of gets into the faith side of things too, is I said, there was actually, I was honest with them. And I said, here I am. I'm going to speak on the subject of what the Bible actually says about living an abundant life. And I said, and I can tell you just a few hours ago, I was tempted to bail. I've never bailed on a talk ever, but I was tempted to, because I'm like, can I literally pull this off? Right. Because, here I am stepping in water in our basement and the basement smells entirely different than it should, all those kinds of things. Right.
Yeah.
Oh. And then I kind of thought, wait, do I really want a faith that is dependent on my circumstances?
Yeah. So good.
And am I willing to talk to God about what abundance means? Certainly on days where I win a big client or have a big success in front of an audience, that's great. But does that mean I'm going to toss out what I know about my faith, what I know about God when I'm having this kind of day? Like, is that the kind of faith I want to have, Right. And do I also believe that God could probably pull off some miracles with this? And I probably, hey, we have podcasts where we create content, in some ways, when I reflect back, some of my best blog posts are situations like this, right? Like these horrible things. And I wind up turning them into events and keynotes and all that stuff. And so I wound up laughing in my basement, thinking, here I was horrified. And a couple of minutes later, I'm laughing because I'm like, you know what? I'll probably make $100,000 off of this story someday, in some way, right? Like, how great is this? Right. So I just changed it. But I did also speak to the audience about that. Like, listen, I want to be real with you guys that I do believe, and this is related in some ways to the topic itself, was, I do believe that part of what, walking in abundance. And I think what God is talking about, like Jesus said, I came so that you can have life and have it to the full or have it abundantly.
Absolutely.
It's independent of circumstance, right? It is. And it's that whole thing of, and I think when we walk with God, and this is, obviously getting more into the faith side of things, but when we walk with God, he's definitely clear that we're going to have challenges, right? And as entrepreneurs, we know we're going to live, if it's just entrepreneurship, what we're talking about, you're going to have challenges, but in a lot of ways, like the challenges are also what makes it rich, right? Like we would be bored,
right,
if we didn't have challenges. So it's like, I'm just glad I'm facing challenges knowing that God's with me too, so I was just able to shoot straight with them. So, and I told my wife, as I was kind of falling asleep last night, I'm like, you know what? I love having great stories, but I don't want my best stories being ones from 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Like I want my best stories to be recent and the ones that are still coming, that kind of thing. So,
well, and it is a gift, honestly, like these crazy, horrifying things that happen to you. In a sense, it's all about perspective and labeling and what you call something. So you can call that bad. And like, that's something I've been trying to do lately more is, fear and stress and worry and these different things. You can tend to be like, oh, fear's bad or stress is bad. Well, okay. Yeah. Because you're calling it bad, and I'm not trying to make this weird, like upside down universe, but I'm just saying, you know what I mean? Like it's like, no, stress is my friend. Stress helps me to become better. It helps me to stay focused in a sense within reason. You know what I mean?
Within reason. Yeah.
Or fear is like, no, see, people think, oh, fear's bad. It's scary. I'm like, no, actually fear can help motivate you to do some of your best work or to really live at times maybe this euphoric feeling because you overcame this fear that was in your face,
Yep. But I would say also to add to that, no matter what your strategy, don't do it alone.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, I think that's one of the other things that my old strategy was, I'll hide it and I'm not going to let people in on it because that would also show weakness. Right. And, you're not meant to navigate this whole thing, whether it's entrepreneurship or just life. You're not meant to navigate it alone. And by admitting those things is not weakness. That actually takes strength. So don't do it in isolation, because that's, I think, also where you can get into a whole lot of trouble.
Yeah. And the Bible talks about too, it's not good for man to be alone. So, when we're alone, like it's not good. It's good for like the moment when you need to recharge and get away in
As
solitude.
An introvert, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. But we're definitely not supposed to do this journey by ourselves
all the time. Yeah. It can be a slippery slope. That is so interesting. Have you taken the Enneagram test?
That's funny. It's come up so much lately.
I'm just curious.
I have, but I rushed it. So when I got it. I got a 3. Okay. And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
How about you?
So I'm a 7, which is an enthusiast, and then I have a 6 wing, which is the I guess it'd be the loyalist, things like that. And so a 6 is going to ask a lot, like worst case scenario is this, and like I say, worst case scenario 7 times a day probably, which is probably a little too much, but I feel like, oh, this is where I'm at, So my 7 is going to be like, let's go, let's take a new way home, let's try new food, let's meet new people, this is incredible, new experiences, extrovert for the most part. And then my 6 is like, okay, but what are we doing? And okay, you have this plan, but yeah, it's almost like an anchor, a healthy anchor in a sense. But then when I'm under pressure, I become a 1, which is a perfectionist. And so I will find myself like, oh, this interview, or like I said something stupid, or oh, that didn't go the way I wanted it to. And so in the world of podcasting, you can edit whatever you want and make yourself look a certain way. And it's tough sometimes to be kind of warts and all, like I'm just going to put my name on it and just be out there, and this is where I'm at, like what you were doing, So I would think if you are a 3, I know you took it fast. 3s are, I believe, performers, which is really cool. And 3s are amazing because they can become any other number if they need to. They can kind of be a chameleon in a good way.
Yeah, that was the part that resonated with me. I've taken a number of different, different personality things. And, a lot of times I wind up just being a hub, it's like that. So I don't know whether I've just learned to take those tests or
right. I know.
Like, I know what you're asking.
I know what you're doing here. Yeah,
exactly right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
I feel that too. I'm like, how do you not unknow things, but, well, this has been interesting. I mean, we are still cruising on time, and I know we don't have all day. This has been so interesting so far. I'm almost like, now maybe we should just change the title of the thing and just talk about fear, because that was such good content.
We can certainly do that. I mean, it is interesting how I do think that fear, people ask all the time, my podcast is called Dream, Think, Do. We do events called Big Dream Gatherings, so a lot of what we do is around helping people, dream bigger and think better. But people will say, what tends to shut down dreams more than anything else? And I think a lot of people, when they ask that, oftentimes they're thinking not enough money, not enough time. But I'll be the first one to say that fear is the number one dream killer.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It just keeps people frozen in time, unfortunately. That was one thing.
It's so true. It's one of those, especially when all of the dreams we've gotten to see people walk out, in some of the best stories start with people who have no money and no time, but they know why, what it is they want to go after. They know why they want to go after it, and they find a way, right? As long as they're, and the what and the why also help them to push through the fear too. So fear is a big, big deal.
Yeah. And I like too, in your story, what you were saying more recently, stories of, there's a balance, I think, of like, oh, I'm just this buffoon that doesn't know anything. And people will tend to talk themselves down. And then I think they miss out on a lot of good opportunities to speak into someone's life or speak in front of people or earn money or whatever, because they've talked themselves out of like, oh, no, I'm just like you. I'm just like you. Well, if you're just like me and you haven't learned anything and you're, for a sense, like you think you should be, maybe you're asked to speak, but you're like, well, no, I see myself in the audience. Well, then you're not helping anybody, Right. But then I think there's a side where all you do is like, not you, but I'm just saying people in general, if they just name drop and they're just like trying to flex all the time, then it's also can turn people off too. So I think it's a good tension of like, I've achieved some things. I don't know everything. Here's what I'm learning. And here's some things I've learned. And I'd love to share them with you, versus like, oh, I know everything. I've got it all figured out. I have no insecurities or flaws or weaknesses. And then it's like, well, I can't relate to you either, because you are a sociopath.
Right. Exactly. Got something wrong there. Well,
Right.
a lot of my speaking over the last few years has been on college campuses, which is awesome and also very intimidating for the same reasons I talked about the young professionals.
Yeah, that's intimidating.
A group of people that are young. Oftentimes, I remember my college years. I felt like I knew a lot of stuff. I felt like I knew a lot more than I actually did. All of those things, and I think the most intimidating thing about that audience, though, which has actually been really good for me, as and I don't know what college audiences would have been like in the 70s and 80s, but I would say definitely now one of the biggest challenges is their BS meter is so sensitive. You know what I mean? Like they won't put up with someone that they don't believe. You might have a small contingency who are just nice. So if you just are name dropping, or you're trying to, make yourself look all that, there's a few that will put up with that. But I mean, literally I've seen, because I get to see other speakers and things like that too. I've seen students just walk out.
Wow. Yeah.
It's just interesting. And so it's a really interesting challenge. And, what's funny, or the irony, at least for me, is, one of the temptations to combat that is to just trying to amp up, and be more like, I'll fix that by having an even bigger and better persona.
Right.
And it's like, well, that works, right? Like, that's great thinking. And I've just found, the reverse is absolutely true. But a big part of that, though, is also knowing, kind of goes back to the what and the why. A big part of that is just knowing, what you're passionate about and why it's important to you, and then being able to speak to those things.
That's really good. Kind of going back to my backstory a little bit of just, walking through epilepsy and things like that with my mom and helping her. The other thing that helped, because I was thinking at times, some of the fears from different things, they were just, fear was fear. It would kind of get lumped in with other things, where it's like, well, I'm scared about this speech, or I'm scared about this new job opportunity, or this conversation I have to have with this person, but it's all the same fear, and it's irrational. Yeah. It's crazy. It's like you said, it's like the lizard brain. It doesn't make sense. And what I found was there was one time where I was mowing the lawn for the older neighbors across the street, and I would do yard work for them, things like that. And they'd pay me pretty well and give me, like a bag of peanut M&Ms in a Ziploc bag. It was just like grandma and grandpa was adorable. And I remember they had this old mangy dog. And the one day after I was done mowing, I went in, it's like a summer day, and I knocked on the door, and they couldn't hear me. I could hear the TV was on. So I knock, ring the doorbell, couldn't hear me. And so then I ended up walking in, which was fine. they, I was a neighborhood kid. They understood that, but the dog didn't understand that. So this little mangy dog, it's like a medium kind of build dog, came and jumped on me and bit my arm and like threw me up against this, like all these picture frames. And it was way more traumatic in my brain than probably would have happened. Broke a little bit of skin, but it really wasn't that bad. It was like a little red dot, but it was just so traumatic to getting bit by a dog,
Yeah, that's real.
So I kept that with me too for a long time. But yeah, it was interesting because whenever I would see the dog or go over to their house with my dad, I'd be hiding behind my dad. I'd be almost sobbing. And I'm like, oh, there's something in my eye. It's like, you're obviously lying, like you're just scared of the dog and the dog's growling at me, things like that. So I felt what happened was I learned to use math. And like you said, like I'm a believer as well, and I'm a Christian, and I'm a pastor of church, and so I totally believe in Scripture and that we are bigger. We need God, we need relationship, things like that. But for me, one of the things that helped me combat fear was math. And so what I had to do is I took how many years I've been on the earth, and how many days I've been on the earth, and then I would like stack it up against, okay, I've been bit by a dog one time. Okay, so if I'm 40, how many days is that by one dog bite? Or if it was like, for example, for you, maybe even how many times have you had your pants blow out, or have a tear right before you're getting to go on stage? It's probably pretty rare. But so that's helped me. Maybe the Nigel in me is like, like Nigel is needing statistics, and I'm like, hey Nigel, listen, you're bit by a dog once when you're 10 years old. You're 28 now, or you're 34. It's highly unlikely that it's going to happen again.
I think that's awesome. Well, and like the brain science behind that backs that up, because it's the amygdala that is your inner bodyguard, right? And your basal ganglia, which I call your inner project manager. Your basal ganglia is always looking for systems, right? Process. So like the basal ganglia is what allows you to leave your house, drive someplace you're used to, whether it's where you go to work or the mall or that thing that you've driven 1,000 times. You remember leaving your house, and now you're pulling into the parking lot. But what happened on the drive, you couldn't tell yourself because your basal ganglia took over and said, hey, think about whatever you want to. I got this, right? Like it's the part of your brain that allows you to go on autopilot so you can really be processing other stuff. The problem with that is your basal ganglia and your amygdala work together. So the amygdala says, worry, fear. Basal ganglia says, I got a procedure for that. No problem. That's why, especially if you're a black belt level worrier like I was, you could be in worry in 3.2 seconds and not even be sure what sparked it.
Wow. Yeah.
Right.
That's amazing.
But what's interesting is what allows you to overcome those things. It definitely is not, well, I'm going to forget this. I'm not going to worry about it. Those things don't work. But basically you want to engage your prefrontal cortex, which is the mental processing, the executive function of your brain. And the way you do that is to wake it up. And one of the ways you can wake it up is to do something that you wouldn't necessarily do if you were running away from a saber-toothed tiger or a woolly mammoth. And math could be one of those things, right? Like what it would do is it would allow your inner bodyguard and your inner project manager to go, wait, the boss is what I call your executive function or your prefrontal cortex. If the boss is doing math, it must mean that we're probably not actually in danger. We can stand down, right? So like cool. there's literally brain science behind that very I love the strategy, but just maybe even knowing some of the brain science. I mean, it's that whole thing too of being able to say, asking yourself some questions like that, helps to engage the boss to be able to say, okay, it's just good thing to do, but it's also helping your brain to realize I'm not in physical danger right now.
And it like helps. Talks you down off of a cliff.
Yep,
like, listen,
exactly.
Like, okay, I know that you are irrational and I know that you need systems or data or statistics, but here's how we're going to do that. Yeah, that's amazing. And it's so funny because it's like your brain knows what you're doing to it, or your emotions know what's going on. So if I'm like, on my calculator and I'm like, okay, let's look at this, for example, we had theft one time with one of our locations. We have one of our businesses, and it was a big deal. And I wasn't trying to downplay it. And, we lost a couple $1,000s. I was like, man, that stinks,
Yeah.
But then, and I was a little sensitive at first. It's kind of like when if you would injure yourself and there's a wound there and then it scabs over and, you put a Band-Aid on it, you get stitches or whatever, but it's still going to be sensitive. So it's like, I'm allowing myself to be like, listen, I'm not saying like, get over it. You should be over this by now.
Suck it up. Yeah, buck up, camper.
Yeah, like that's not healthy either, because I don't think it's going to heal properly and be like a scar, because it's honestly what you're going for is a healthy scar, because that means that everything's working well. But,
right.
With that, it was just giving myself time. But I was like, I'm going to use the dog bite mathematic thing again, for this, because, okay, how many times has one of your business been broken into? And then I'm just going to, and it's going to take me a while because I have to get so many days on the other end of it, on the other side of it. And then I can also take the days before. Okay, we've been business for 7 years, and this has only happened one time. Okay, well, let's take these days, and because I could sense myself, kind of like you said earlier, like the temptation to be afraid. Like it reminds me of the scene in Elf, and where he's walking by, and those guys are handing out flyers out in front of like the record store, and he just keeps taking them. It's like you don't have to take the flyers. Yep. You might feel that pressure. You might be at a Sam's Club or a Costco, and they have the samples of like the summer sausage, but you don't like summer sausage.
Take the summer sausage, Matt. Are you kidding me? At Costco or Sam's Club, you have to take the sample.
Super delicious. Let me think of something grosser.
Now that you bring that up, we'll meet you at the Sam's Club.
I know. I'm like, now I'm hungry. I'm trying to think of a grosser food. So there's chopped liver or something. I don't know.
There you go.
Some sort of fake burger. I don't know. But anyways. I'll feel that pressure to be like, oh, I have to take this because they made eye contact with me. But I'm like, no, you don't have to take that. You can feel the pressure to take it, but I'm deciding not to take it. So it's helpful to try to figure out this brain of ours.
Absolutely. Well, and you want one other strategy that helps, especially if we're talking like real deal in the moment.
And I think I'm just going to call an audible too. And we'll just call this like the science of combating fear or something. And
there you go. I love it.
This has never happened before. This is great. We started with one
that's
thought,
exciting.
and in real time, we're changing it up. I love it. So yes, please.
So one of the other things, we'll stay on the whole brain science thing. One of the other things that's really interesting about the brain is like the brain is so incredible. It's literally mind boggling to think all of the different things that are happening in our brain right now that are keeping our body alive and breathing, that we're able to have a conversation. It's processing blood, it's cellular structure, all these kinds of things. It's absolutely incredible, fascinating. But no matter how well it's designed, we still can fake it out.
Sure.
And one of the things, especially when, we're facing or feeling fear, whether that's some big event about, that we're worried about in 10 years in the future, or, you're going to speak in front of your team in 10 minutes, right? There are some things that we can do. And this actually kind of goes back to some of the most basic strategies, but I love having these in my back pocket because you asked, like, what do you do? And this, I do some of the mental strategies we just talked about, but some of the physical things are just as powerful, if not more powerful, and you feel the benefits immediately. So one of the things is that our body can be driven by the brain, but our body can also inform and change the brain. So as you well know, what's interesting is they've actually done research and studies to say, okay, how we hold our body has an impact on us at a cellular level. So they have these low power poses.
Sure.
So
like
sitting,
Amy Cuddy.
Crouched, hunched over. Exactly right.
Yeah,
so, it's absolutely fascinating. I know there's been pushback on some of her studies, but I always say, I could care less in some ways about what the studies say, because try it, you'll feel a difference.
Exactly. I've done this. I still do this. I'm like, I need a men's stall, and I need to go do the Superman pose for 2 minutes.
Right. Exactly right. Get those hands up. So, but it's interesting. Like I joke with audiences all the time. Like I can make the whole room depressed, and that's not just because of my dad humor, my dad jokes, right? Like I can get everybody feeling bad about themselves. Just act like you're sad. Act like you're lonely. And we know what that looks like and feels like. The shoulders either go up to your ears. That's what happens when I get tense is, my shoulders, like all of a sudden I feel like they're earrings, just hanging right there. But some people, their shoulders slump, they hunch over. It's amazing. You look at those power poses. Two of the main low power poses are exactly what we do with our phone, right? Our hands are close together. We're hunched over. Our head is down. Those kinds of things lower our testosterone level. They lower our dopamine levels. And we do them all the time, right? No wonder we feel fear all the time. At the same time, if we stand up, like it's that whole thing of how does that happy person stand? How does that happy person sit? How does the confident person sit or stand? And it's that, the Superman pose, hands at your hip, or, raised triumphantly, and I know here you are a musician and you're playing at churches, your pastor, all those kinds of things. I also laugh at many of the power poses. The high power poses are also poses that people naturally hit when they're worshiping. I don't know if you ever noticed that, but it's fascinating, right? Like, oh my gosh, the thing that a lot of people, well, I'm Lutheran. So, they always say that the spirit's willing, but the Lutheran is, resistant or whatever, like don't always get the hands up. But man, when we feel it, like your hands just go up and you worship and you praise, right? And you're like, that's a power pose. And I know they've done research on, kids who are blind, who have never had sight, and they win a race and their hands naturally go up, right? Like we know what it is to stand and look confident, and just to give yourself that chance to do that in the face of fear is just one more thing that helps that inner bodyguard to say, okay, I guess we don't have to worry about saber-tooth tigers right now. And at the same time, it might be like, for me, I'm always asking if I'm getting ready for a presentation and I'm feeling that temptation to be afraid, to be able to go, should I check my slides? Should, there's some things to be aware of, right? Like last night, interestingly enough, I had sent over my slides in advance, very simple slide deck, but some fonts got messed up and some of the words were messed up. And I just got this nudge like, the slides on it might not be right. Now, at the same time, like I could have just been worried and not taken action, but I just took a deep breath, put a smile on my face, put the shoulders back, and just walked over to the sound booth and said, hey, could I take a look at my slides real quick? And we were able to figure out, yes, in fact, there were some issues, right? And we were able to fix them. And I did it with a smile on my face, which is great because I could feel myself going, oh my gosh, we only have 10 minutes. I could freak out right now. It's like, nah, we're fine. That's fine. So sometimes it's those physical things that we can do, can help to override that inner bodyguard and say, all right, if there are things I need to be paying attention to, let me do that with a confident look about me, my shoulders back, and smile on my face, because I'm probably going to be a whole lot better at handling it. And if there's nothing to be worried about, then I should be having fun anyway.
Exactly. And I remember one time we were going out to play in this youth conference, and there might have been like 2,000-3,000 students out there. And I was like, we're ready. I knew the songs and I knew where we were going. I knew the plan, but I didn't realize it. I was really tense. And the one guy that I traveled with, Daniel, who was leading the group, made a joke and we all laughed at it. And I immediately felt this like pressure release valve. And I was like, whoa, I was really more tightened up than I realized. I relaxed and I was able to play better and to perform better, which was great. And a friend of mine, Chris McAllister, author, great guy, he has a saying that says, relax into your brilliance.
Ooh, that's good.
And so I always try to do that, like, okay, because when you're stiff and stressed out and nervous, you're not going to get your best work. You're not going to get your best product. But it's like, so I need to get myself in my mind, like, okay, if I have to go into a bathroom and do the pose, or just go back to like, okay, you've done this, you know your charts, you know your chords, you know your flow, you've done this hundreds of times, you're going to be good. And then it's like this pep talk that I give myself before I go out, because I do want to do my best work, and I don't want to let fear or stress rob myself or anybody, of that experience.
Preach it.
Yeah. Thank you. If I can throw in a reference too, because I grew up, so 94, 95, I was like 14 or 15, and that was right in the heyday of the grunge movement. And so when I found Pearl Jam, they had that song called Jeremy, which is based on a true story, and it's really sad, but there's one lyric in there where it says, on top of mountain, arms raised in a V, which is pretty interesting, because I'm like, yeah, that's like the arms raised in a V. That's like going way back to that. So if I could just throw in like a grunge reference, I try to whenever I can.
Nice pull. I like it. Well played.
Well
played,
sir. Eddie Vedder and all those guys.
Yeah.
But, it made a huge impact on me. But well, we are at time, Mitch. This has been so fun and a total unexpected twist. I love that we went this way because it's been super helpful.
Me too. This is fun.
This is really good stuff. I've got a ton of notes here, and we'll put this all in the show notes. let's do a final closing thought, something maybe that's come up in real time to leave with our listeners, and then we'll do guest plugs and we'll be done.
Perfect. I would say, especially since it's the beginning of the year, I would leave this one final thought, and I think it does relate to fear. But I would just encourage everybody, as you listen to this, give yourself some the permission in 2020 to be a novice at something. I don't know about you, but as I've been an entrepreneur for a while, I've been doing this almost 20 years. I'm getting closer to the 20-year mark, all that kind of stuff. There's this thing that sneaks in, and it's that fear of, or basically don't change anything because it's not broke, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And what that winds up doing is you wind up doing the same things over and over. And I've realized, interestingly enough, I never thought I'd say this phrase, but in the last couple of months, I actually started to do yoga. And I used to take kind of the Ron Swanson approach to yoga, I would mock it. I did not respect it. All those kinds of things. Yeah. Didn't understand it at all.
It wasn't American enough or something. Yeah.
Right. But I wound up finding an instructor, a practitioner who is a retired Marine. He was a stiff, when he got started, as I was, recently, all those kinds of things. And I'm like, all right, I think I could learn from this person. And I went and tried it out. And Matt, I was terrible, awful at it. And what was funny was, at first I'm like, I'm quitting this because I look like a buffoon. I got all these people. I'm not wearing the right clothes. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know the names for stuff. It's and I can't touch my knees, let alone my toes,
right?
All that. And then at the same time, I got this overwhelming sense of how long has it been since I've allowed myself to be the new guy?
That's good.
And I realized, you know what, this is a good thing. This is a good thing to do something once in a while where I'm the new guy. I don't know the most in the room. I know the least in the room. And I feel like it's doing good things in me.
Sure.
Maybe God knew I needed a little dose of, new guy, humility or something. I don't know. But it's been one of probably the healthiest things. Now, yoga is also helping me stretch and get in shape in ways that I've never been in shape, which is great. But I realize, one of the big benefits is just allowing myself to be a novice, in one particular area. And that doesn't mean throwing everything else out, starting fresh everywhere. Is no, but I realized that's actually opened up some other things in my world, in my life, in my business, where I'm like, you know what, I'm more open to saying, let's try something new over there, and let's do something, or let's learn from this person. So 2020, I believe, is going to be the year of no fear, or the year of, getting rid of fear in your life, but also, trying at least one thing that's new.
That's so great. That's so great. And I just heard this quote the other day. I want to add on to this. It's Seth Godin says, adults don't learn new things because they don't like the feeling of incompetence, which I think as you were saying that, I'm like, I just heard this quote and I have to share it because that's a good one. So brilliant.
Yeah, that's a great cap on that idea. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's so good. Well, let's promote away. I want to hear more about where people can find more about you. Everybody today, you've heard Mitch's experience, you've heard his passion for life and just amazing things that he shared today. Make sure you check out, he's a speaker, he's a coach, he's got books for sale, things you can check out, the podcast. So make sure you devour all things Mitch Matthews. And that's mitchmatthews.com, right? Matthews has 2 T's, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. And any other thing you want to promote or share?
Oh, no, I love it. It's so awesome to be on Entreneato. I love what you're doing.
Thank you.
And I think if you're liking this, this content, come over and check out Dream, Think, Do, the podcast as well. That'd be great. Would love to have you. I think we've got very complementary tribes, man. It'll be good to encourage each other. So I love it. It's such an honor to be on the show.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Mitch. This was amazing.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Entreneato. We'd like to invite you to visit us on the web at entreneato.com, and here's some of the neato things you can expect when you get there. As a token of our appreciation for tuning in, you can download a free audiobook, and that's thanks to our friends at Audible. You can purchase your very own super official, super comfy, and super trendy Neato t-shirt. Looking to take your life and business to the next level? You can sign up for a free coaching call. Have a question or comment for us? You can click contact and connect with us. All of this and more is waiting for you at Entreneato.com. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to our show and stay current on all the amazing interviews with our Neato guests. Now take what you've learned and apply it and start living your Neato life now.